Today I'm going to finally show you the long-awaited video of how to grow the perfect tomato. We have lots of different tomato varieties here, so the key is do some research and pick the variety or varieties, if you want to do a few different kinds, that you think would suit you the best. There are some hybrid tomatoes, such as Mountain Fresh or Scarlet Red, for example, that were bred to grow really large and have thicker skin so that they don't crack as easily if you get heavy rain. Those are a little bit harder to find at just like regular garden nurseries. Most of the ones at your garden nurseries are going to be heirloom tomatoes, which have softer skin, but usually a little bit better flavor. I sell what I grow, so I'm going to be doing multiple different varieties. I'm going to do some large traditional standard red tomatoes. I'm going to do some different colored heirloom ones, some different cherry varieties, and some grape. I'm a little late planting these, so you can see that there's already little tomatoes forming, and that's not really a good sign at this young of an age, but you can fix that. All you have to do is pull them off, so it's not a big deal at all. Same with if they're starting to show blossoms early, pull those off as well. The reason they're doing this is because they were tired of sitting in these little cups at the plant nursery for so long. They need to be in the ground where they can get more nutrients and where they can have room to grow. And since they were stressed, they started to mature faster to carry on their genetics. So that's why they're blooming and forming little tomatoes. You don't want that, it's going to stunt its growth. So just pluck it off, and then that way they can focus more energy into actually growing to their mature size, and then they will start to blossom and produce fruit. And you can just toss these in your compost pile because obviously they're too immature to eat. And fun fact for those of you that may not know this, the leaves and the vines of tomatoes are actually toxic, so make sure that your pets don't get a hold of those and eat them. You want to plant tomatoes once all danger of frost is gone, and we've had such an unpredictable, insane spring that's why I'm a little bit behind on planting these. Most people in my area are just planting them now, but for me I am behind because I always like to get a head start, but it just was not possible this year. Plus, I'm growing more stuff than usual this year, so I had to get other stuff in the ground sooner, so it had priority over that since tomatoes technically can wait a little bit longer because they like it warm, so that's another reason. But once they're in the ground, they'll start to look a lot better. You're going to need some really good compost for your tomatoes. And if you have chickens like I do, their manure makes a really, really good compost because chicken manure is high in phosphorus and tomatoes really like phosphorus. If you don't have chickens, you can actually buy chicken manure at the store, or if you have a neighbor or a friend that has them, you could always ask them. Bone meal is yet another great source of slow-release phosphorus. And if you don't know this already, phosphorus really helps with root development, and that's major for tomatoes. The numbers on the fertilizer bags stand for the macronutrients. The first one is nitrogen, which aids in growth. The second one is phosphorus for root development. And the last one is potassium or potash. Tomatoes don't need a lot of nitrogen because what that would do is make the plant grow really, really big, and it would focus on that, but it wouldn't focus so much on blossoming and then producing fruit. So you want to be careful with that. I used a 10-20-20 fertilizer for the ground where I'm going to be planting them, so that way they don't get too much nitrogen. I'm also going to add tomato tone because this has the extra phosphorus like we were talking about and calcium, which they really need. If tomatoes don't get enough calcium, they'll get blossom end rot, which is where the blossom on the bottom turns black and the fruit kind of rots and it's really nasty and you can't eat it. So you want to make sure that they get enough calcium. Another tip to make sure that you can prevent blossom end rot is to make sure that your tomato plants are getting enough water. If they're not getting enough water, it's going to prevent the plant from absorbing all the nutrients that are available, so blossom end rot will still happen even if there's calcium. So make sure it's getting adequate water. So technically, you can plant tomatoes in containers if you have limited space, but I would recommend doing at least 15 to 20 gallons. You can get away with doing it in a 10, but the more space they have, the better. You could use grow bags too because they're a lot cheaper than containers. But if that's the case, make sure they're getting plenty of compost and nutrients and plenty of water because the containers dry out so much faster and you're way more likely to get blossom end rot. In the past, before I was selling my produce, I did grow tomatoes in containers a few times, and they did okay, but since I expanded and started planting these in the ground, they've done a lot better. We're also going to be using some Epsom salts. It's a great source of magnesium, and it really helps green up the plant and make them really healthy and happy and good looking. And they could use it because they're stressed from being in there so long. If you're doing them in the ground, I recommend that you spread your fertilizer and your compost prior to planting them. But then today, when I put them in the ground, I'm going to top it off with a little bit more compost and slow release fertilizer so it won't burn them. So now we're going to walk up to the field where the big garden is. Here's some corn. All right, here we are. Almost lost it. So you can use tomato cages, or you can use a cattle panel. You can find this at your local feed store, and it's a lot sturdier, so I like using this. And it's held in place with some T-posts. And then as you can see, I have some fabric down. This is to keep the weeds away, and also it'll keep the ground warm, which will help the tomatoes grow faster. There's some cut grass pieces up here. I can just brush that off with a broom. Although this weed, it looks like a pokeweed, found its way through, so I'm gonna get rid of that. And then I'm just gonna, there's already some existing holes from the previous year, but I'm gonna cut new holes too to plant the tomatoes. And then you can use baler twine as they grow to attach them to this to keep them in place. And don't be afraid to prune your tomato plants as needed, because that'll help them grow, because they get so many long gangly branches, you don't need all of that. And for your best results, you want to plant them at least 1 to 2 feet apart. Anytime you're oops, I dropped one. It's okay. Anytime you're transplanting some plants, I recommend you do it at the end of the day, like I'm doing, because that way the harsh, bright sun won't be stressing them out even more than they're already going to be as you put them into a new environment. And they'll have an adjusting period overnight where the temperatures are cooler, and like I said, the sun's not burning them up, where they can adjust to their new climate. And give them plenty of water, especially the first couple days. And now once they are established and they're starting to bear fruit, if the dirt or the soil around them is still moist, don't overwater them, because that can cause cracking. If you stick your finger in the soil and it's dry, go ahead and give it a drink. So now I'm going to group all of my varieties together so that way I have all the same ones with each other. Oh, and if you don't want to use the black fabric to keep the weeds away and to keep the ground warm for them and to help retain moisture, you could also use straw or undyed mulch. So there aren't too many pests that are going to bother your tomatoes, especially because they're poisonous. Well, the leaves, not the tomato, obviously. However, there is a worm called the tomato hornworm, and their favorite food is tomato leaves. Fortunately for me, I don't know if I'm just lucky or what, because I know they are in this area, but I've never really had that issue with my tomatoes, so I don't spray mine. However, if it's an issue in your area, or if you're worried about it, you can spray your tomatoes with Garden 7 spray, or if you wanted to use something organic, you could use neem oil. BT spray, which is also natural, works pretty well too, because a lot of times organic stuff doesn't work quite as well, but the BT seems to do the job for the most part. But like I've said, I've been very lucky. I haven't really had to spray. Hopefully I won't have to start. I really hope I'm not jinxing it by saying all this. There is a natural predator though to the hornworm. There's a type of wasp of all things, and it lays its eggs on the worm, and then once they hatch, the wasp larva will burrow into the worm and eat it alive. So they're actually, those little wasps, they're your friend, because it'll keep your tomato plants safe. So one thing that's really cool that I wanted to show you about the tomato plants, and I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, I'm trying to get it to focus on it, but the tomato plant from the bottom all the way up is covered in these teeny tiny little hairs. Oh, there you go. See all those hairs? And they actually can turn into roots. So obviously when you're taking them out of the pot, you want to be careful not to damage the root. But if you do, it's not the end of the world, because like I said, these little tiny hairs will turn into more roots. So when you plant your tomato, I recommend that you actually bury it deeper, about right here, because these little hairs will form a better rooting system. And that's really good for your plant, because the more roots it has, the more nutrients it's going to absorb. So you'll get healthier, larger, better tomatoes. But I just thought that nature was so cool, how tomatoes have evolved to have this little survival technique, basically. And then this dead branch, just pull it off. You don't need it. And without this one on it, it's going to focus more energy into growing, which is what we need. And all these little baby branches at the bottom too, you can go ahead and just pluck off. And actually, if you wanted to, you could get more tomatoes this way, because like I said, those hairs are going to turn into roots. So the ones that you pluck off, you can stick into the soil when you're planting it. I'm not really going to leave it in this pot, I'm just showing you an example. And water it down, it'll develop more roots and it'll grow into another plant. So you can actually save a lot of money by doing it this way. Just buy a couple of plants and then propagate the rest with the little shoots coming off of the bottom. So obviously I'm up here alone. I can't film and plant at the same time because I need both my hands. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of how I plant them, and then I'm going to turn off the camera, plant the rest, and then I'll show you how it looks afterwards. Breaking news, I just came back to get more compost and there's a salamander in the pool, so we're going to save it. Oh, there it is. Yep. We're gonna rinse it off with well water to get the chlorine off of it because amphibians absorb things and they breathe through their skin. So we have to make sure it's gonna be okay. All right, it's been released back into its natural habitat away from the pool. Okay, back to the compost. But remember, amphibians are good, they're your friends because they're gonna eat the bugs that wanna go to your garden. The bad bugs, that is. I know there's plenty of good ones too, such as pollinating insects like bees and butterflies. Ladybugs that eat other pests. Alright, back to the tomatoes. Another tomato fun fact, eggshells make really, really good compost for tomatoes because of the calcium. You can crush them up and sprinkle them around where you're going to plant, or you can till them right into the ground before you start planting. Alright, I'm going to refill their drinking water real quick, and then we'll be back up into the garden planting. Okay, we're back at the garden. That's enough distractions, but I'm going to show you one more before we get back to it. You can see the broccoli heads are starting to form. Isn't that cool? Look, the squash and zucchini are looking good too. Okay, enough distractions, back to the tomatoes. There's just always so much going on this time of year. Alright, I'm back. The cucumbers are near where I have the tomatoes, so I just noticed that they've sprouted. Oh, I spilled the compost. Oh well, that'll make the cucumbers happy. It was just a little bit, luckily. Okay, so like I was saying, we're gonna make the hole really deep so that way we can bury it deep into the ground so those little hairs on the tomato can form more roots. There's a ton of rocks in my area, so I'm gonna have to get those out of the way. This first variety I'm gonna do is called Midnight Snack. It's a type of cherry tomato, and when it's ripe, it gets like a really pretty dark purpley black color. Actually not a huge fan of tomatoes, I never have been, and I will say, like most things, the ones from the garden do taste better than what's at the store. But I do tend to really like the Heirloom cherry tomatoes. They're really sweet and sugary, especially the sun sugar. That is my favorite. I will be planting those. All right, so I'm going to break up some of that soil that was in there. There's all the roots. Again, be gentle with it because you don't want to stress the plant out and hurt it. But it's not the end of the world if a couple break off because it will easily grow more. Let's put that down there. And now we'll fill it in with compost and soil. Bury it nice and deep, cover up as many of those little hairs as possible. It's going to keep the plant strong and healthy. And now I'm going to add a little bit of tomato tone around the base. Try not to get it on the leaves because it is slow release, but it still could burn the leaves if you put it directly on it. And now I'm going to put in just a little sprinkle of Epsom salt. And if you would prefer to do it this way, you could even mix together 2 tablespoons of Epsom salt to a gallon of water, and you could water all the plants with it in it. There we go. Now I'm going to cover it back up with the soil. All right, one down, a lot more to go. They're all planted. We have Midnight Snack, we have Sun Sugar, Sun Gold, cherry tomatoes, ooh, missed one, grape tomatoes, lemon boys, and a bunch of different beefsteak varieties. Oh, and Romas. And then I even propagated some new ones off of shoots that I pulled off of this big one. So as they grow, you can use some twine to attach them to this to hold them steady, because if not, they're just going to topple over and vine out. Technically, you can do it that way, but it works so much better as far as spacing goes if you tie them up. And it'll make your leaves less likely to get disease, and it'll make the tomatoes less likely to rot or get picked off by animals. When you do stake it up to something, you want to keep the twine kind of loose. Like, you want it on there tight enough that it's going to obviously support it, but you don't want to cut off circulation, because keep in mind that this plant is alive and it's going to keep growing and getting wider. So yeah, make sure you subscribe, because it's going to look so cool this summer. I'll just be able to walk down like a whole pathway of tomatoes on both sides. It's going to be awesome, and it's going to be so easy to just come through and pick them right off of here. And now that they're finally in the ground, they're going to be thriving. At the end, I'll show you some pictures of tomatoes that I grew the past couple years, so you can get an idea of what we'll have here this summer. And stay tuned so you can see how the rest of the garden is doing too. I got lots of watermelon We got seedless, orange seedless, moon and stars, which is a really cool looking heirloom variety. We got cantaloupe sprouting, all sorts of stuff. The sunflowers are looking good. And this week we'll also be doing sweet potatoes and pumpkins. So thanks for watching. Now here's a look back at our tomatoes from last year, and good luck with yours this year.